The bus rattled along the highway and Lily pressed her forehead against the cool window. Her reflection stared back at her, a nervous 19-year-old clutching a worn folder against her chest. Inside that folder was sheet music for a simple piece, something her piano teacher had said she could play in her sleep. Today was supposed to be easy. Just a standard audition at the Berkshire Music Conservatory. Play the simple tune they'd requested, smile politely, and hope for the best. She'd left home before dawn that morning. Her parents had insisted on closing the restaurant early the night before, so they could all have dinner together. Her father had made her favorite dumplings even though his hands ached from chopping vegetables all day. Her mother had pressed a lucky coin into her palm and told her to play from the heart, not just from the fingers. Lily looked down at that coin now, tucked in her jacket pocket. She wasn't entirely sure what her mother meant by that. She'd been playing piano since she was 7, but formal training had always been spotty. Lessons were expensive. Sometimes they could afford a teacher for a few months. Other times she'd teach herself using YouTube videos and library books. Her grandmother used to help her back when she was alive. Those were the best lessons, though they never felt like lessons at all. The bus pulled into the station downtown and Lily grabbed her small backpack. The conservatory was a 15-minute walk from here. She'd looked it up on Google Maps at least a dozen times over the past week, memorizing every turn. She couldn't afford to get lost and be late. As she walked through the city streets, Lily felt smaller with each step. The buildings here were old and grand, made of stone that had witnessed 100 years of music students walking these same sidewalks. She passed coffee shops where people sat reading thick books, their expensive laptops open on marble tables. Everyone looked so sophisticated, so confident. She glanced down at her own clothes, a simple black dress she'd borrowed from her cousin, paired with flats she'd worn to her high school graduation. They would have to do. The conservatory building took her breath away. It stood 4 stories tall with tall windows and carved details around the entrance. A bronze plaque near the door listed names of famous musicians who'd studied here. Lily had heard of maybe 2 of them. She climbed the stone steps, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Inside, the lobby was even more intimidating. The floors were polished marble. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting warm light across oil paintings of stern-looking composers. A few students walked past her, carrying instrument cases and chatting easily about music theory and upcoming recitals. They belonged here. She felt like an imposter. Auditions for the scholarship program? A woman behind the front desk looked up from her computer. "Yes," Lily managed to say. "I'm supposed to be here at 10. The woman checked her list and nodded. "3rd floor, room 301. You can wait in the hallway until they call you." Lily climbed the wide staircase, her footsteps echoing. Each floor had practice rooms lining the corridors, and she could hear fragments of music floating out. Scales, arpeggios, pieces she didn't recognize. Everyone sounded so good, so polished. Her confidence began to crack like old paint. Room 301 had double doors made of dark wood. She could hear a piano inside, someone playing something fast and complicated. Another audition was happening right now. Lily sat down on a bench in the hallway and pulled out her sheet music, even though she'd already memorized every note. Looking at it made her feel slightly more in control. The simple etude she'd prepared was pretty straightforward. It had a nice melody and some basic chord progressions. Nothing fancy. The letter she'd received 2 months ago had been very clear about what to prepare. She'd practiced it until her fingers could find the notes automatically, until she could play it without thinking. The doors opened, and a girl about her age emerged. She looked relieved, her face flushed from the performance. She gave Lily a quick, sympathetic smile before hurrying down the hallway. Lily's stomach twisted. "Next audition, please," a voice called from inside the room. Lily stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked through those heavy doors. The room was much larger than she'd expected. It wasn't a small practice space, it was a proper auditorium with rows of seats rising up toward the back. A beautiful grand piano sat on a small stage, its black surface gleaming under spotlights. But what made Lily freeze was the number of people in the room. The letter had mentioned a panel of judges. She'd imagined maybe 3 or 4 people sitting at a table. Instead, there were at least 8 people seated in the front rows, all holding clipboards and papers. And scattered throughout the auditorium were maybe a dozen more people watching quietly. Some looked like professors, Others wore expensive suits and seemed older, more distinguished. This didn't feel like a simple scholarship audition anymore. Come in," said a man with silver hair and kind eyes. He sat in the center of the front row and seemed to be leading the panel. "You must be Lily. Welcome to Berkshire." She walked toward the piano, her legs feeling disconnected from her body. "We're so glad you could make it today," the man continued. But something in his voice sounded odd, stressed maybe, or distracted. He kept glancing at the papers in his lap, then at the other judges, then back at her. A woman next to him leaned over and whispered something urgently. He whispered back, shaking his head. Lily reached the piano bench and set down her folder. She adjusted the bench height slightly, buying herself a few seconds to breathe. "Just take your time getting comfortable," the silver-haired man said. "We're still sorting through some administrative details." More whispering among the judges. Lily pretended not to notice, running her fingers lightly over the piano keys without pressing down. The instrument was magnificent. She'd never played anything this nice before. The piano at home was an old upright that her parents had bought secondhand. It was missing a few keys and always sounded slightly out of tune no matter how often they tried to fix it. She glanced back at the audience and noticed one man in particular, sitting alone several rows back. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and an intense, focused expression. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't place why. He wasn't looking at any papers like the judges. He was looking directly at her, but not in an unkind way, more like he was genuinely curious about what would happen next. The silver-haired judge finally looked up from his papers. His expression had changed. He looked uncomfortable now, apologetic. "Lily," he said, and the warmth in his voice couldn't quite hide the tension underneath. "I'm afraid we need to have a conversation before you begin." Lily's heart sank. Something was wrong. Had they changed their mind? Was she not supposed to be here after all? Her mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. "There's been a bit of confusion with your application," the judge continued, glancing at his colleagues before looking back at her. "It seems there may have been an error in our communications." The room felt suddenly colder. Lily gripped the edge of the piano bench, waiting for whatever came next. All those hours of practice, the money her parents had scraped together for bus fare, the hope she'd been carrying like a fragile thing for 2 months. Whatever he was about to say, she knew it would change everything. The judge cleared his throat and stood up, walking closer to the stage. In his hand, he held 2 different pieces of paper, and he kept looking between them like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. "Lily, can you tell me what piece you prepared for today?" he asked gently. She swallowed hard. "The Etude in G major, the one mentioned in the letter you sent me. It's a beginner intermediate piece about 2 minutes long." "Right, yes," he said, nodding slowly. "That's what we have here in our records." He held up one of the papers. "But I'm afraid there's been a significant mix-up in our office, and I want to be completely honest with you about what happened." Lily felt her chest tighten. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The judge exchanged glances with the woman sitting next to him, who gave him an encouraging nod. He continued. "Your application was flagged about 3 weeks ago by one of our faculty members who reviews submissions. She saw something in your background materials that caught her attention: the recording you submitted, your teacher's recommendation letter, your essay about why you wanted to study music. All of it suggested someone with exceptional potential." Lily blinked. This wasn't what she'd expected to hear at all. "So your file was moved to a different category," he went on. "A much more competitive one, actually. The Thornton Memorial Scholarship. It's our most prestigious award. Full tuition, housing stipend, one-on-one mentorship with our top faculty. It's designed for students who demonstrate not just competence, but genuine artistry." The words were nice, but Lily could hear the "but" coming from a mile away. "The problem is," the judge said, wincing slightly, "the person who moved your file forgot to send you an updated letter. The piece you prepared, that simple etude that was for the general scholarship audition. But for the Thornton, we require something much more substantial. A major work from the standard repertoire, something that showcases advanced technique and musical interpretation." The room started to spin a little. Lily gripped the piano bench harder. Another judge, a younger woman with glasses, spoke up. "We are so sorry about this confusion. This is entirely our fault. You shouldn't have to suffer because of our administrative error." The silver-haired judge nodded vigorously. Absolutely. Which is why we want to offer you two options, and you should feel no pressure either way. This is completely your choice. Lily managed to find her voice. What are the options? First option, he said, holding up one finger. You can withdraw from today's audition with no penalty whatsoever. We'll fast-track your application for next year's general scholarship audition, and you'll have plenty of time to prepare. We'll even waive the application fee and guarantee you a spot. That seemed reasonable, safe. She could go home, practice for a whole year, come back ready. Second option, he held up another finger, and his expression grew more serious. If you happen to know a major work, something substantial that you could perform from memory right now, you could audition for the Thornton Scholarship today. But I want to be very clear, this scholarship only goes to one student each year. The competition is intense, and without proper preparation time, well, he trailed off, but his meaning was obvious. Lily stared at the piano keys. A major work. From memory. Right now. The silence in the auditorium was thick enough to cut. She could hear someone cough softly in the back rows, the tick of a clock on the wall, her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Her mind raced through everything she'd ever learned to play. The etude she'd prepared was useless now. What else did she know? Really know well enough to perform in front of all these people? Then something flickered in her memory. A melody she'd heard thousands of times. A piece that had been the soundtrack to her childhood. Her grandmother used to play it every single day. Lily had been maybe 8 years old when her grandmother moved in with them. She'd been a pianist in China back before Lily was born. She'd played in concert halls and taught at a music conservatory in Shanghai. But arthritis had stolen that life from her, twisting her fingers until they couldn't stretch across the keys anymore. When she came to America, she brought almost nothing with her, just a few photos and her collection of sheet music. Most days, her grandmother would sit in their small living room in the late afternoon, when the restaurant downstairs was quiet between lunch and dinner service. She'd place her gnarled hands on their old piano and play one particular piece, always the same one. It was the only piece she could still manage with her damaged fingers, because she'd played it so many times that her hands remembered it, even when they couldn't do much else. Lily had absorbed that piece through the walls, through the floor, through the air itself. She'd listened to it while doing homework, while helping her parents in the kitchen, while falling asleep at night. Eventually, she'd started teaching herself to play it, matching the notes by ear, figuring out the patterns. Her grandmother had noticed and had begun giving her quiet pointers. Not formal lessons, just gentle guidance. Listen to how the melody breathes here, she'd say. Feel the weight in this chord. They'd never told Lily's piano teacher about it. The piece was too advanced, too difficult. Her teacher would have said she wasn't ready. So it became their secret, something precious between grandmother and granddaughter. The piece was Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a monster of a composition. Dark, dramatic, technically demanding. Famous enough that serious pianists around the world knew it. Difficult enough that most students didn't attempt it until they'd been playing for many years. Lily had never performed it for anyone. Not even after her grandmother passed away 2 years ago. It felt too personal, too raw, like it belonged to another world, not to auditions and judges and competition. But she knew it. Every note, every phrase, every dynamic marking. It lived in her bones. She looked up at the judge. Can it be any major work? His eyebrows rose slightly. Yes, as long as it's from the standard classical repertoire and demonstrates appropriate technical difficulty. And I can play from memory? That's actually preferred for this scholarship level, he said. Lily took a deep breath. This was insane. She'd never played this piece in public. She'd never even played it for her current teacher. And now she was considering performing it in front of a panel of expert judges who would catch every mistake, every hesitation, every imperfection. But somewhere in her mind, she could hear her grandmother's voice. Play from the heart, not just from the fingers. The same thing her mother had said at dinner last night. I'd like to try, Lily heard herself say. I'd like to audition today. A murmur rippled through the judges. The silver-haired man looked surprised but pleased. Are you certain? You don't have to decide right now. You can take a few minutes to think about it. I'm certain, Lily said. And she was surprised to find that she actually meant it. I want to play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. The murmur grew louder. One judge actually sat up straighter in his seat. The woman with glasses leaned over to whisper something to the person next to her, her expression somewhere between impressed and concerned. The silver-haired judge studied Lily's face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she really understood what she was committing to. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right then," he said, returning to his seat. "Whenever you're ready, Lily. Take your time." She turned back to the piano and adjusted her position on the bench. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to steady them. In the back of the auditorium, she noticed that older gentleman sitting alone was now leaning forward, his full attention fixed on her. Lily closed her eyes and thought of her grandmother. Thought of all those afternoons, all those quiet moments, all that love poured into these notes. Then she lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. This was it. No going back now. The first 3 chords hit like thunder. Lily's fingers came down heavy and deliberate on the keys, and the sound that filled the auditorium was nothing like the gentle etude she'd planned to play. This was dark. This was powerful. The opening of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor didn't tiptoe into the room. It announced itself like a storm rolling across the sky. She kept her eyes closed. If she looked at the judges, at all those serious faces watching her, she'd lose her nerve completely. So instead, she went somewhere else in her mind, back to the small apartment above her parents' restaurant. Back to those afternoons when the smell of ginger and garlic would drift up from the kitchen below, mixing with the sound of her grandmother's playing. The opening section was all about those heavy chords, repeated and insistent. Her grandmother used to say they sounded like bells tolling, like something inevitable approaching. Lily leaned into them, letting them ring out, feeling the vibration travel up through her arms. Then came the melody. It emerged from all that darkness like a voice crying out. Her right hand picked out the notes while her left hand kept up the relentless rhythm underneath. This was the part where her grandmother would close her eyes too, swaying slightly on the piano bench. "Feel it here," she'd tap her chest. "The music lives here first, then travels to your fingers." Lily poured everything into those phrases. Every memory of her grandmother. Every early morning at the restaurant helping her parents prep vegetables. Every moment of doubt about whether she belonged in the world of music. It all went into the piano, transformed into sound. She hit a wrong note. Her left hand stumbled slightly on one of the chord progressions. Any trained musician in the room would have caught it. But she didn't stop. She didn't freeze up or apologize with her body language. She pushed forward, keeping the momentum going because that's what her grandmother had taught her. "A performance isn't about perfection," she used to say. "It's about telling the truth, about meaning what you play." The middle section came next, faster and more agitated. This was the technically demanding part, where both hands had to move independently, creating layers of sound that wove together. Lily's fingers flew across the keys. Some notes came out cleaner than others. Her technique wasn't polished like someone who'd studied at a conservatory for years. But there was something raw and honest in the way she played. Something that couldn't be taught from a textbook. In the audience, not a single person moved. The silver-haired judge had his pen frozen above his clipboard, forgotten. The woman with glasses had her hand pressed to her mouth. Even the other students who'd been waiting in the hallway and had quietly slipped in to watch. They all stood perfectly still by the back wall, and the older gentleman sitting alone several rows back. He was leaning so far forward he'd nearly come off his seat. His eyes were closed now too, and tears were sliding down his weathered cheeks. But Lily didn't see any of this. She was somewhere else entirely. She was back in that moment 2 years ago when her grandmother had played this piece for the last time. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Her grandmother's arthritis had been getting worse, and some days she couldn't even button her own sweater. But that day she'd insisted on playing. Lily had been home from school, studying for a chemistry exam at the kitchen table. The sound of the piano had made her look up. Something was different about the way her grandmother was playing. More urgent, maybe. More fierce, like she was trying to say everything she'd never spoken out loud. Lily had abandoned her textbooks and gone to sit on the floor near the piano, just listening. When her grandmother finished, she'd looked down at Lily with eyes that seemed both sad and peaceful. "This piece saved me many times," she'd said in Mandarin. "When I lost my career, when I had to leave my country, when your grandfather died, I would play this and it reminded me that beauty still existed, that I could still create something meaningful, even when everything else was taken away." She'd reached down and touched Lily's hair. "Someday when you need it, this music will be there for you too. It's yours now." 3 weeks later, her grandmother was gone. A stroke in the middle of the night. So fast they didn't even get to say goodbye. Lily had tried to play the prelude at the funeral. Made it through exactly 4 measures before her hands started shaking so badly she had to stop. She hadn't touched the piece since. Until today. Now, as she moved into the final section, she understood why her grandmother had given her this music. It wasn't just about the notes or the technique. It was about having something that belonged to you. Something that no one could take away. When you had nothing else, you still had this. The climax of the piece approached. This was where everything built to a fever pitch. Where the pianist's hands had to stretch across the keyboard, grabbing fistfuls of notes, making the entire piano sing and shout. Lily attacked these measures with everything she had. Her whole body was involved now, leaning and swaying, putting her weight behind each chord. More wrong notes. Her fingers clipped a few keys. One chord didn't quite land together the way it should have. In a formal competition, these mistakes would cost points, would maybe disqualify her entirely. But something strange was happening in the auditorium. The mistakes didn't seem to matter. Because underneath all the imperfect technique, there was something else. Something that couldn't be measured or graded. It was feeling. Real, genuine human feeling. The kind that makes people stop scrolling on their phones. The kind that makes them put down their coffee cups and actually listen. The piece began to wind down. The fury and passion of the climax gave way to something quieter, more reflective. The melody returned, but sadder now, more resigned. Lily's hands moved more gently across the keys. This was the part her grandmother loved most. After all the storms, she used to say, "We find peace. We accept." The final measures were almost like a lullaby, soft descending phrases that seemed to drift away like smoke. Lily played them as tenderly as she knew how. Each note was a goodbye. To her grandmother. To her old life. To the girl who'd gotten on the bus this morning thinking she'd just play a simple tune. The last chord hung in the air. She let it sustain, keeping the pedal down, letting the sound fade naturally until there was nothing left but silence. Lily finally opened her eyes. Her hands were still resting on the keys. She was shaking. Her face was wet. She hadn't even realized she'd been crying. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was so complete that Lily could hear her own heartbeat again, rapid and frantic in her ears. Then the silver-haired judge slowly stood up. His clipboard fell from his lap to the floor with a clatter that made everyone jump, but he didn't seem to notice. He was staring at Lily with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, admiration, disbelief. The woman with glasses had tears streaming down her face. She didn't even try to wipe them away. And the older gentleman in the back? He was standing now too, one hand pressed against his chest like he was trying to hold something inside. "Where?" the silver-haired judge finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Did you learn to play like that?" Lily's throat was so tight she could barely speak. "My grandmother," she whispered. "She taught me." "And your grandmother, where did she study?" "Who was her teacher?" "In Shanghai." "At the conservatory there." "A long time ago." The judge's eyes widened. He turned to look at the older gentleman standing in the back of the auditorium. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. The older man began walking down the aisle toward the stage. His footsteps echoed in the quiet room. As he got closer, Lily could see his face more clearly. There was something in his eyes. Recognition mixed with wonder, mixed with something that looked almost like pain. When he reached the front of the auditorium, he stopped and looked up at Lily. When he spoke, his voice carried a slight accent, and it trembled with emotion. "What was your grandmother's name?" Lily's voice came out barely above a whisper. Wei Zhang." The older man's legs seemed to give out slightly. He reached for the edge of the stage to steady himself. His face had gone pale, and his hand was trembling against the wood. "Wei Zhang," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting the words, testing them to see if they were real. "From the Shanghai Conservatory. She would be in her 70s now if she..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "She passed away 2 years ago," Lily said softly. "She was 73. The man closed his eyes and nodded slowly. A tear escaped and ran down his cheek. He made no move to wipe it away. "I knew her," he said finally. "A long time ago. We studied together. We performed together. She was one of the most gifted pianists I ever knew. The auditorium was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Every person in that room was holding their breath, watching this moment unfold. The silver-haired judge had sat back down but was leaning forward, listening intently. The older man collected himself and looked back up at Lily. "My name is David Huang. I'm a guest lecturer here today. I just happened to stop by to observe the auditions." He laughed quietly, though it sounded more like a sob, though I'm beginning to think there's no such thing as just happened when it comes to music. He climbed the few steps onto the stage, moving slowly, like he was in a dream. He stood a respectful distance from the piano from Lily. "May I ask you something?" Lily nodded, not trusting her voice. "That interpretation you just played, the way you phrased the middle section, how you let the melody breathe in those opening measures, the exact tempo you took in the final descent, those are very specific choices, very familiar choices." His voice cracked. "Where exactly did you learn this piece?" "From her," Lily said. "From my grandmother. I heard her play it almost every day for years. She couldn't play much anymore because of her arthritis, but she could play this one. It was the only piece her hands could still remember." David pressed his hand to his mouth, overcome. When he spoke again, his words came out thick with emotion. "I taught her that piece. In Shanghai when we were both students. We spent an entire summer working on it together, arguing about every phrase, every dynamic. She had her own ideas about how it should be played, and I had mine. We fought about it constantly." He smiled through his tears. "She was stubborn. She always insisted the opening should be played with more weight, more gravitas, not rushed. 'Let each chord speak,' she would say." "That's exactly what she told me," Lily whispered. "Let each chord speak." David laughed and cried at the same time. Of course she did. Because she was right. She was always right, even when I was too proud to admit it. He looked at Lily more carefully now, really seeing her. "You have her gift. Not just her technique, her soul. The way you played just now, it wasn't a student copying their teacher. You understood the music. You felt it." The silver-haired judge stood up again and approached the stage. "David, are you saying—" "I'm saying this young woman just played one of the most emotionally honest performances of that prelude I've heard in 30 years, David said firmly. "Yes, there were technical imperfections. Yes, a conservatory student with more formal training could probably play it cleaner. But cleaner isn't always better. Sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in." He turned back to Lily. "Your grandmother and I lost touch after I left Shanghai. I moved to Hong Kong, then to America. I heard she had gotten married, had a family. I assumed she'd continued her career. She could have played in any concert hall in the world." His voice dropped. "What happened?" Lily took a shaky breath. The arthritis started when she was in her 30s. By 40, she couldn't perform anymore. She taught for a while, but eventually it got so bad she had to stop that too. She and my grandfather immigrated here when my mother was young. My grandfather passed away when I was little. She came to live with us. My parents run a restaurant and we live in the apartment upstairs. She spent most of her time helping in the kitchen or sitting at our old piano. She never spoke about her past." Lily continued. "Not the performances, not the recognition she'd gotten. My mom said she just let all of that go. She said my grandmother believed that music was a gift you received and then you passed it on. Nothing to be bitter about. Nothing to regret." David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "That sounds like Wei. Always looking forward, never dwelling on what was lost." He paused, then asked gently, "Did she seem happy? In her life with your family?" Lily thought about this carefully. She remembered her grandmother's face when she cooked with her mother, the two of them talking in rapid Mandarin while chopping vegetables. She remembered her grandmother's laughter during family dinners, the way she'd tell stories about China that made everyone at the table lean in closer. She remembered how her grandmother would sit at that old upright piano every afternoon, and even though she could only play one piece, she played it like it was enough, like it was everything. "Yes," Lily said with certainty. She was happy. She told me once that she'd had 2 lives. Her first life was about performing, about being recognized, about achievement. Her second life was about family, about teaching one person to love music the way she did, about making dumplings on Sunday mornings. Lily smiled through her own tears. She said she wouldn't trade her second life for anything. David had to sit down. He sank onto the piano bench next to where Lily stood, put his face in his hands and wept. Not quietly, but deeply, the way someone cries when they're letting go of something they've carried for decades. The judges and the other people in the auditorium didn't know what to do. This wasn't a typical audition anymore. This had become something else entirely, something sacred and private, even though it was happening in front of dozens of witnesses. Finally, the woman with glasses spoke up gently. "Maybe we should give everyone a moment. We can take a 15-minute break." But David shook his head and pulled himself together. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and turned to face the judging panel. "No break needed. I want to say something, and I want to say it now while everyone is here." The silver-haired judge nodded. "Go ahead, David." David looked at Lily first, then at the judges. "I am a guest here today, so I have no official say in your scholarship decisions. But I want to tell you what I just witnessed. I didn't just hear a talented student play a difficult piece. I heard the continuation of a legacy. I heard proof that music doesn't die when arthritis steals a pianist's hands, or when concert halls close their doors, or when someone's name is forgotten." His voice grew stronger, more passionate. "Wei Jiang was my friend, my colleague, one of the finest musicians I ever knew. Life took her career from her, and I never got to tell her that her interpretation of Rachmaninoff was the one that stayed with me all these years. Every time I've performed that piece or heard someone else play it, I've measured it against the way she understood it." He gestured toward Lily. "And today, 40 years later, I got to hear her play it again, through her granddaughter, through someone who learned it not from a teacher looking to shape a student's technique, but from someone passing on something precious, something irreplaceable." David turned to the silver-haired judge. "Richard, you asked me to observe your auditions today because you wanted my opinion on young talent. Well, here's my opinion. This young woman has something that can't be taught in any conservatory. She has authenticity. She has courage. She has a connection to music that goes beyond notes on a page." The judge, Richard, was nodding slowly, looking at his colleagues. They seemed to be having a silent conversation with their eyes. David wasn't finished. "If there's any way I can be involved in her education here, I want to be. Whether that's as a mentor, an advisor, or just someone who checks in from time to time, because I owe her grandmother that much, and because talent like this deserves to be nurtured." Lily felt like she might faint. This couldn't be real. 2 hours ago, she'd been on a bus, clutching sheet music for a simple etude. Now she was standing on a stage while a renowned pianist offered to mentor her. Richard stood up and addressed Lily directly. "I think we've seen everything we need to see today. You gave us something far more valuable than technical perfection. You gave us truth." He paused, then smiled. "We'll be in touch very soon with our decision. But Lily, pack your bags. I have a feeling you're going to need them." The other judges were nodding, some of them smiling, others still dabbing at their eyes. Lily's knees felt weak. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Thank you all so much." As the judges began gathering their papers and talking among themselves, David approached Lily one more time. He pulled out his phone. "Do you have any photos of your grandmother? From her time in Shanghai?" Lily nodded and pulled out her own phone with trembling fingers. She scrolled through until she found the one she'd saved from an old album. Her grandmother at maybe 22 years old, sitting at a grand piano, looking directly at the camera with confidence and joy. David looked at the photo and broke down again. "That's her. That's exactly how I remember her." He smiled through his tears. She looked so young there, so full of dreams. "I'm glad some of them came true, even if they weren't the ones she expected." He handed back the phone and placed his hand on Lily's shoulder. "She would be so proud of you, not just for how you played today, but for understanding what she was really trying to teach you. Music isn't about perfection. It's about connection. It's about memory and love and passing something beautiful from one generation to the next." Lily couldn't speak anymore. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Her heart so full it felt like it might burst. 3 months felt like both forever and no time at all. Lily stood in front of the heavy wooden doors of the Berkshire Music Conservatory again. But everything was different now. Last time she'd been clutching sheet music for a simple etude and hoping just to get through the day. This time she had a key card in her pocket, a room assignment for the student dormitory, and her name listed on the practice room schedule. She was home now. This was where she belonged. The acceptance letter had arrived exactly 1 week after her audition. She'd been at the restaurant helping her father prep for the dinner rush when her mother called her upstairs. The envelope was sitting on the kitchen table, thick and official-looking. Her hands had shaken so badly that her mother had to open it for her. Full scholarship, housing included, stipend for books and supplies, and a handwritten note at the bottom from Richard, the silver-haired judge. "We can't wait to see what you'll become." Her father had cried. Her mother had called every relative they had, speaking rapid Mandarin into the phone, her voice bright with pride. They'd closed the restaurant early that night and made a feast. Her father had made her grandmother's favorite dumplings, the ones with extra ginger that nobody else in the family really liked, but they made anyway, because it kept her memory alive. Now, walking through those doors as a student rather than a nervous audition candidate, Lily felt her grandmother's presence stronger than ever. She touched the lucky coin in her pocket, the one her mother had given her that first day, and whispered, "We did it, Grandma." Her first official day had been overwhelming. There were forms to fill out, classes to register for, and dozens of other students to meet. Everyone seemed so talented, so confident. During the orientation, several faculty members had introduced themselves, and Lily had tried to remember all their names and what they taught. But the moment that mattered most came in the afternoon, when Richard had pulled her aside in the hallway. "There's someone in practice room 12 who'd like to see you," he said with a knowing smile. She'd found David sitting at the piano, playing something soft and intricate. When he saw her, he'd stopped and stood up, his face lighting up with genuine warmth. "Welcome," he'd said simply. "Welcome to your new life." Over the past 3 months, David had become more than just a mentor. He was a bridge to her grandmother's past, someone who could tell her stories about the young woman her grandmother had been before arthritis and immigration and loss. They met twice a week for lessons, but it never really felt like teacher and student. It felt more like two people honoring someone they both loved. He was tough on her, though. He made her work on her technique, fixing all the little habits she'd developed from teaching herself. "Your grandmother would want you to have every advantage," he'd say when Lily got frustrated with scales and exercises. "The feeling you have, that's your gift. But technique is what will let you share that gift with the world." Today was special. Today was her first official recital as a conservatory student. Not a competition, not an audition, just a chance for new students to perform for their peers and faculty. She'd been practicing for weeks, working on a piece that David had suggested, one of Chopin's nocturnes. Something beautiful and lyrical that would let her showcase the emotional depth she was becoming known for. Lily made her way to her practice room, her own practice room. With her name on a card outside the door, she still couldn't believe that was real. She had 3 hours before the recital, and she wanted to run through the piece one more time. But when she opened the door, she stopped short. Sitting on top of the piano was a small package wrapped in brown paper. A note was attached in David's handwriting. "This arrived for you. I thought you should have it before tonight." With trembling fingers, Lily unwrapped the package. Inside was a worn journal, its cover faded with age. She opened it carefully and saw handwriting in Chinese characters, her grandmother's handwriting. The dates on the entries were from the 1970s, when her grandmother would have been in her 20s. David must have tracked this down somehow. Maybe from old colleagues in Shanghai. Maybe from archives at the conservatory where her grandmother had studied. However he'd found it, he'd given her something priceless. Lily couldn't read all the characters, her Chinese wasn't that strong. But she understood enough. These were her grandmother's thoughts about music, about performances, about what it felt like to play. One entry near the middle made her catch her breath. "Today I played the Rachmaninoff again. Professor Huang says I'm too emotional with it, that I need more control. But I think he's wrong. This piece isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be felt. It's meant to break your heart and put it back together. When I play it, I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm trying to be honest. That's the only thing that matters." Lily sat down on the piano bench, clutching the journal. Her grandmother had struggled with the same things she was struggling with. The same doubts, the same certainty that feeling mattered more than perfection, the same determination to play music her own way. She thought about that audition 3 months ago. How terrified she'd been. How she'd almost chosen the safe option and left. If she had, none of this would have happened. She'd still be at home, helping at the restaurant, taking occasional lessons, dreaming about a life that seemed impossible. But she'd taken the risk. She'd played that piece even though her hands were shaking, and she knew she'd make mistakes. She'd chosen to be honest instead of perfect, and it had changed everything. There was a knock at the door. Lily looked up to see David standing in the doorway. "I see you got my gift," he said softly. "How did you find this?" "I still have connections in Shanghai. When I told them about you, about what happened at your audition, they wanted to help. One of Wei's old classmates had kept some of her things. This journal was in a box in her attic." He smiled. "I thought you should know that you come from a long line of stubborn women who refuse to play it safe." Lily laughed through sudden tears. "Thank you. This means everything." David came into the room and sat down in the folding chair by the wall. "Are you nervous about tonight?" "Terrified," Lily admitted. "Good. That means you care. That means it matters." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I want to tell you something your grandmother once told me back when we were students. We were about to perform a difficult duet for a major competition, and I was panicking about all the things that could go wrong. And she looked at me and said, 'David, we're not trying to be perfect, we're trying to be present, we're trying to say something true. If we do that, the music will take care of the rest.'" He stood up and walked to the door, then paused. "She was right then, and she's right now. Don't go out there tonight trying to prove anything. Just go out there and be honest, be present, the rest will follow." After he left, Lily sat at the piano and opened her grandmother's journal again. She paged through more entries, seeing glimpses of a life she'd never fully known. Dreams and disappointments, victories and losses, all written in her grandmother's careful hand. Near the end of the journal, she found an entry from years later, after the arthritis had already started. The handwriting was shakier here, harder to read. "My hands betray me now. But I realized music was never in my hands, it was always in my heart, and that no one can take away." Below that, in newer ink, writing that looked like it had been added much later, was one final line. "I will pass this gift on. Someone will carry it forward when I no longer can." Lily closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. "I've got it, Grandma," she whispered. "I'll carry it forward, I promise." That evening, she walked onto the recital hall stage wearing the same borrowed black dress from her audition. She'd thought about buying something new, but this felt right. It felt like completing a circle. The audience was full of other students and faculty members. Her parents had taken the train up from the city and sat in the front row, her father in his one good suit, her mother wearing the jade necklace her grandmother had given her years ago. David sat near the back, his face calm and encouraging. Lily sat at the piano and took a deep breath. She thought about her grandmother playing the same instrument 40 years ago. She thought about all the students who'd sat here before her and all who would come after. She thought about how music moves through time, from teacher to student, from grandmother to granddaughter, from one heart to another. Then she began to play. The Chopin Nocturne filled the hall. It wasn't perfect. She rushed slightly through. One passage and her left hand got a bit muddy in another section. But it was honest. It was present. It was true. And in that truth, there was something beautiful. When she finished, the applause was warm and genuine. But more than that, she saw David nodding with satisfaction. She saw her parents beaming with pride. And she felt, really felt, her grandmother's presence like a hand on her shoulder, proud and loving and at peace. After the recital, other students came up to talk to her. Some asked about her interpretation of the piece. Others wanted to know her story, having heard rumors about her audition. Lily answered their questions, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about a small apartment above a restaurant, about afternoons filled with the smell of cooking and the sound of a piano, about an old woman with gnarled hands teaching. Her granddaughter, that music wasn't about technique or recognition or applause. It was about connection, about memory, about love passing from one generation to the next. Later that night, back in her dorm room, Lily placed her grandmother's journal on the shelf next to her sheet music. She took out her phone and texted her mother. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for making sure I could have lessons. Thank you for supporting me and thank you for raising me with Grandma's music." Her mother's response came quickly. "She always knew you were special. She told me once that you had the gift. Not just talent, the gift of understanding what music really means. She was right. She's watching you now and she's so proud." Lily set down her phone and looked out her window at the conservatory campus. Lights glowed in practice rooms where other students were working on their craft. Somewhere, someone was playing scales. Someone else was running through a difficult passage over and over, and Lily smiled because she understood now that she wasn't here just for herself. She was here for her grandmother, for all the concerts her grandmother never got to give, for all the students she never got to teach, for all the music that lived in her heart even when her hands could no longer play. This was her grandmother's second chance, and Lily was going to make the most of every single moment. She was told to play a simple tune, but she'd performed a masterpiece instead, and in doing so, she'd discovered that the most beautiful music isn't played with perfect technique. It's played with perfect love.